I'm Sophie Nicklaus. I come from originally the Center on Taste and Feeding Behavior in Dijon, a mixed research unit with INRAE. And now I'm with the Deputy Scientific Direction on Food and Bioeconomy at the headquarters in Paris. So my perspective is a little bit mixed between both positions. I'm going to talk about how to drive consumers to eat more plant-based foods, considering nutritional, taste, and organizational challenges. So maybe I'm just going to open or push open doors, or I'm going to throw camelina oil on the fire. I don't know. You will decide. So I want to cover taste, nutrition, and health and food system organization challenges, as I already said, because I think they are quite important in this discussion. First, why rethinking the role of plants in diet? This comes from the Eat Lancet Commission you've all heard about. Basically, what this commission tells us, if we want diets to be more sustainable in a variety of dimensions, they have to be rethought about. And we have to think about the diversity of food in our plates. And we have to think also of the share of plant versus animal-based protein. And in the optimal Eat Lancet plate, non-plant-based food really represent a very small share of the plate. What is also a small share of the plate is processed foods not there. So that asks a lot of questions regarding our current diets. In France, children's food, mainly 70% of children's calories come from processed foods, according to the last dietary national survey in 2015. So 70%, so they're not there. So that means a huge shift if we want to achieve this type of plates. So we have to consider the challenges behind those shifts. So more specifically, when we look at the recommendations for the shift in our plates, we can see that the only plant-based food that's consumed in excess is sugar. So maybe we should get rid of sugar. And there are many other plant-based foods that are not consumed enough. Nuts, legumes, fruits, and vegetables. For them, fruits and vegetables, it's not so bad, but nuts and legumes are really, should really increase in diet. And that varies a lot according to geographical regions. Of course, diet varies according to culture, local availabilities, and the shift that we have to make in order to achieve the Eat Lancet objective is different according to the regions. And it's probably more challenging in affluent countries than in lower income countries, because in fact, the sustainable diet, we are further away from sustainable diets in affluent countries. Well, that's another way of looking at how much fruits and vegetables are not consumed enough according to a variety of countries, but well, we understand already understood. When we consider also the dietary challenges, we have to realize that we also have a generational challenge. If you look at this graph, what it tells, in fact, is that it's just showing the percentage of small consumers of fruits and vegetables according to age. And as you can see, this share decreases with age. So older people eat more fruits and vegetables. But there are also generational effects, and that are not always shifting in the same directions. So we really have to consider this for us as already older adults, but also for the next generation and how we're going to change things about that. Okay, so what is it so difficult to eat fruits and vegetables? So that's my baby talk. 5 major programs: taste. That's my son, tasting and diet. I think maybe not so pleasant situation. Low calories. For fruits and vegetables, the calories per 100 grams is relatively low. That's an advantage if you want to maintain on the diet where you don't consume too much calories. But in terms of learning how to eat and enjoy food, that's a disadvantage. And I'll come back to this later. Then we have an absence of marketing or availability. That's also a challenge in our food system. So that's what you can see in the supermarket alley. That's vegetables, and that's coming across another aisle where you will find ultra-processed food in shiny packages. So that's not necessarily attractive for consumers. And also, especially regarding children, there are social educative tensions around eating those products. So this results in what I call the unfair competition in the plate, where these foods are in competition with other foods that are much more liked and appreciated. So what about nuts and legumes? Do we have the same problem? So when I did these 5 major problems, that was really for fruits and vegetables. I think the situation is somehow a little bit different. In particular for nuts, we don't have the low calorie problem, but for sure, we probably have the marketing problem. But we don't have the educative tension because it's not still very high in people's mind about we should eat more of them. And legumes also is probably a little bit different, and I'll come back to this later. Okay, so the taste challenge. So taste, where does it come from? So it's combination. So taste in the general meaning is really about what you experience, but it can be also about what you like. So it's a polysemic word. What you experience when you eat something is a combination of sensory inputs from a variety of receptors, and that's helping you when you crunch apple to release nutrients and tastants in your mouth, and that will influence your taste receptors, and also that will also release flavor components. And through retroolfaction, that will just tap in your olfactory receptors. So it's a combination of a variety of sensory inputs, quite complex, and we still continue to understand the dynamic aspects of flavor. So, but basically, this is about the sensory integration of tastes and olfactory inputs. So odorants, it's a very large world with a variety of molecules which can be discriminated by humans, and a variety of receptors, 350 in humans, and working under combinatory code rules. Taste is a somehow more restricted domain with 5, 6 major taste qualities and accompanying receptors. And I will be particularly interested in beta taste receptors. There are 25 beta taste receptors that are coding for detecting a variety of bitter molecules in foods. And so that's represented here. Okay. Well, that's an old paper. It's just showing the variety of taste receptors and the variety of molecules that can be detected with these receptors. So that's evolved a lot. But basically, we have to understand we are well equipped to detect bitterness in food, and that's one of the challenges regarding plants, probably. Okay, then in terms of liking, what is innate in terms of food likes and dislikes? So indeed, the drive for sweetness and the rejection of bitter taste is probably innate, as shown by Ken Berridge. If you look at cross-species reactions in newborns to sweet stimuli, in general, you find a positive reaction with a specific display of the tongue thrust. That's a sign of acceptance. I mean, that's very well maintained across species. And similarly, for bitter taste and exposure, we'll find this very prototypical mimic that's called the gape, and where the individual is acting, opening the mouth wide, as if it was wanting to reject the tastant. So again, very well preserved. In terms of food odors, there's an avoidance of unpleasant food odors such as butyric acid, shown at birth, but but that's about it. All the rest is learned through experience. So we are very innate, very few innate preference, but we learn through experience. And that's a very important component, because then when we come back to behavior, we want to modify things that are learned from birth. And so we have to consider also the problem from the start. And when we look at what happens when children grow older, so that's something that we did in a cohort of infants in France, in Dijon. We tried to describe the taste children are exposed to as they grow older over the first year of life, for instance. So we asked parents to tell us what children eat, and we use sensory profile to describe the taste intensity of infant food, and from this we derive the taste exposure indicator. And what we found, in fact, was that sweet taste is a dominant taste infants are exposed to in France. So it comes from milk. First food milk is sweet, but it also comes after complementary feeding from introduction of a variety of food in the children's diet, including fruits. And when we look at the other tastes, we see that bitter taste is a taste that is less exposed or less present in children's diets. So children are raised in a debiteurized diet. They are not used to cope with this specific taste. And that's really a feature of what they're exposed to. So these data were collected around 2005. So I would assume that the situation is probably worse now, but we haven't run other studies to really demonstrate this. In that cohort, we also looked at taste preference. Of course, bitter taste is the least preferred taste, and that's what we show from a study. And we looked also at acceptance of olfactory odors related to plants. At 8 months, there is no difference in the perception of odors by babies. At 12 months, we start to see some avoidance of some flavors. The flavor of 3-methylamine, so in the mind that can be found in fish, and dimethyl disulfide, so very specific to garlic, but no specificity regarding plant-based food. Okay, what happens regarding learning to like plants? So that's a colleague of mine who did this experiment, very nice experiment. So she asked mothers of 6-month-old babies to describe what was liked food, unliked food, and she asked them to expose the children to those liked and disliked food for 8 days. Liked food were in general carrots. So carrots, a sweet vegetable, was in general given to all children, and they really readily accepted it. Disliked vegetable were in general green vegetable, green beans, spinach, broccoli, etc. Not always the same. So they repeatedly presented those foods. What does it show? Children at the beginning were really discriminating the vegetables. So parents were really readily able to identify this. They were able to learn to like the vegetables. It's a steep curve. It's like a perfect demonstration of learning effect. That's what we call the mere exposure effect. It's very nice. But unfortunately, most of the time parents stop giving a food after 2 or 3 trials, because they consider the child doesn't like it. And so they won't repeat the experience. But they don't provide children with the opportunity to learn to like this taste that is less appealing at the beginning. We expanded a bit this type of experiment by looking at whether there were ways to kind of accelerate the learning curve. And so that was with artichoke puree. We tried to mix either with sweet taste or with fatty taste to increase energy density to look at the consequence on children's liking. So we ran a big experiment to look at this. What it tells us, in short, that in that study, children ate a lot of artichoke puree from the start of the study. We were really surprised with this, but there was still an increase in acceptance, and showing a strong repeated exposure effect. But the association with sweet taste, that's demonstrating the gray bar, did not increase the intake of basic artichoke puree compared to the exposure to the basic puree. So no nutrient learning effect related to the association between sweet taste and the puree. But when we associated the puree with fat, in fact, there was no increase. So children were able to probably detect the energy density associated with the puree and to refrain from eating more. And that remained very stable even after 3 months after the first exposure. So interesting sign of early learning and carryover effect, I would say. When we look at individual variation in this study, we can see very different profile of learning. So when we show the average curve, it's only displaying a lot of varieties. Plate clearers, children who learn very quickly from the start to eat everything. Non-eaters, they will not learn. They will never eat any spoonful of artichoke puree. And those learners. So very largely variable profile. So we really wonder about the biological grounds behind those differences and still investigating this. Then what's in this food? So coming back to bitterness and taste, this is a very recent article on biological activities of bitter compounds. It used to be thought that bitter compounds were toxic, and so bitterness detection was really helping consumers to ingest toxic compound. But in this paper, they really open the question a bit more, and also demonstrating some interesting biological properties and activities of bitter substances, including anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and anti-cancer, and other effects. So I think still needs to be backed up with evidence, but overall, that's quite interesting. So a variety of bitter substances in food coming from a variety of chemical structures, terpenoids, alkaloids, polyphenols, etc. So you know this, you are the plant scientists and not. So I think we really have to rethink also of the potential nutritional benefits of these elements, which are exactly the ones that are probably the problem from a taste perspective, to really find what is good, what is benefited, what should be maintained in plants or not. Previous studies from the lab showed that the sensitivity to allyl isothiophonate, dimethyl trisulfide, and sinigrin compounds from cauliflower was really related to cooked cauliflower consumption, and non-consumers of cauliflower were really more sensitive, for instance, to sinigrin, a bitter compound, than consumers. So from an individual point of view, variability in the biological taste receptor equipment was really associated with consumption. So in this case, the taste barrier seems to be an important barrier. And kind of another study showed the same. And that's another study from Breslin Lab in Model Chemical Sciences Center in Philadelphia. They also did a study to look at the variation in the human T238 bitter taste receptor, and look at whether it would influence bitterness perception in a variety of plants. And in fact, they found that the polymorphism on the bitter taste receptor was associated to the perception of bitterness intensity in glucosinolate carrying plants, but not in non-glucosinolate carrying plants. So specificity related to the moiety of the bitter compound in the food. So what about pulses? So I talked a lot about vegetables. So pulses, again, a couple of studies from the lab in Dijon. I'm just going to wrap it quickly. what we found was that so the pulses in France are not very well consumed, not much consumed. So at the time this study started, there was still a lot of injunctions to eat more, but they were not very developed present in the plate of consumers. So we could show that there's a knowledge of the benefits of pulses, but it's still a food group little chosen. For consumers, pulses lack shelf appeal. So when they are presented in a virtual supermarket, they just simply don't look at pulses. They look at for other foods. Meat takes a center stage, and the implicit attitudes of consumer are more negative towards pulses and cereals. So there was an interesting comparison with another plant-based food. So we can wonder about the role of taste, and there are some reports that some components in pulses are unpleasant to consumers, but really what they say is that they don't want to cook them, but they reject highly processed food with pulses. So there is some kind of a paradox with consumers regarding pulses. Okay, now the nutritional challenges. So what does ChatGPT tells us about that? I just wanted to see how people would look at this. Okay, maybe you probably know this by heart. So talking about protein intake, B12 deficiency, iron absorption, omega-3 fatty acids, calcium and bone health, zinc deficiency, iodine, vitamin D, and caloric intake and energy levels. So caloric, I already mentioned this. That's another way of looking at this. That's a display of preference score in children for a variety of plant-based food and energy density. And in general, it correlates well. I will produce this result in another study. So indeed, yes, energy density does matter. And in fact, when you look at, if you remember the very first graph of the Lancet Commission, starchy vegetables are the ones that are very much consumed, another one for which consumption has to increase. How to look at the nutritional problem, not from an isolated product perspective, but on the diet level. What we did, we analyzed school menus in France, looking at menus based on vegetarian dishes and non-vegetarian dishes. We need to look at the overall quality of the diet. And when we did that, so we calculated what we call the mean adequacy ratio for 23 nutrients, or the mean excessive ratio for an unwanted components in the food. In fact, we found no difference between non-vegetarian and vegetarian menus, but there was, as you can see on the right, a big difference in terms of carbon footprint, which was indeed much higher in the non-vegetarian food in relation with the very high footprint of animal-based food productions. And we break this down into subcomponents or subtypes of the diets. We can see that there is still a little decrease in terms of nutritional quality for vegetable-based menus compared to fish-based menus, in particular in relation to the omega-3 component. Okay, and so when we look at the protein problem, which is often highlighted, in fact, that's what children should consume, and that's what the menu brings. So protein component is not an issue at the level of protein intake that we consume in general. And these menus were respecting the recommendations in France for menu composition. And in fact, when you look at the percentage of the reference value of protein that should be consumed according to the number of meals without meat or fish, it's still way above the recommendation. So there is no issue of protein security with plant-based diets in the frame of a diversified diet. So the specificity of these diets is that they compose there are 5 components which ensure diversity from a nutritional point of view. And when we look at micronutrients, so yes, if we compare the different types of menu, we can see that there is a shortage of certain types of vitamins or elements in some of the menus. So indeed, that can be a cause of concern. And but it's again, also this has to be thought about in terms of the reference we choose to consider the nutritional adequacy of the diet. That can be quite drastic. Sorry, this one is in French, but if you look at the shortage for a variety of menu, for instance, omega-3, if you take the French reference, you will define shortage for all menus. But if you take the EFSA reference, then there is no shortage. So, and it's still debated which nutrient values should be considered. So I'm not saying there are no nutritional issues, but that we should really carefully look at this as this aspect. Okay, now we're going to take the perspective from a food system organization point of view. And that was already discussed, I think, in the previous talk. Where are consumers in food system? They are here, right in the middle. And we want to change diets, but we have to consider also the whole system to understand where we can act on consumers. So I guess it's probably the same when you try to look at, okay, how to increase some traits in a plant. Maybe it's interesting sometimes to de-zoom and understand also things from a wider perspective. So if you want to act on consumers and make them change, you can say, okay, I'm going to take individual target and tell consumers to eat more. Or you can also decide to change the environment or to change the food supply chain. So taking this from a larger perspective and see how this can be useful for change. Okay, that's another way of looking at the different spheres of influence on individual behavior. Anyway, so when we see things from this perspective and we take all the dimensions of sustainability together, we can see that there are ways to optimize diet to combine health and environmental impacts, as was already mentioned by the 8 Lancet Commission report. But in general, it is difficult to really ensure that the nutritional challenge is met without increasing the cost. That creates a costing issue, and that's inequitable, so that's problematic. When we look at evolution of price and quantities over the years in France, so the blue line here is for fresh vegetables. So as you can see, it tends to increase. And when you look at the share in the diet, it tends to be stable or decrease. Whereas other commodities for which price decreased much sharply, consumption increased. So the price of is something to consider. And that results, in fact, over the long run, and that the situation for France, in actually a decrease in fruits and vegetable consumption compared to increase in other products. So these evolution are probably a combined effect of evolution of preference and pricing system, but this has to be put in the balance. How can we intervene, and what are the options from a policy perspective to shift behaviors at individual level? So that's the ladder of intervention of the National Council on Bioethics. Okay, you can say, well, we will provide information, educate consumer. Okay, that's just the first step that you can take to really make things change. There are many other steps, and the ultimate step being to eliminate choice and make sure that will result in what you want to achieve. Of course, in liberal societies, that's not generally what people want to take. And at least for France, you may have heard of the debate on the Nutri-Score. The Nutri-Score is a simplified nutritional labeling for front of pack. It's voluntary, it's not mandatory, and it's just displaying information about the nutritional compound. So it created a huge debate, The Ministry of Agriculture was about not to sign for the update of the Nutri-Score algorithm that was issued by the scientific committee of the Nutri-Score. Currently, 62% of the share of the market of products do display the Nutri-Score, but some companies are starting to pull off. For instance, Danone this year or last year announced that it would remove the Nutri-Score just for something that is voluntary, not mandatory, and that is just informing, just to show also the difficulty of trying to increase in the ladder. So what happens if we try to provide consumers information? So that the experiment we did in the lab are about environmental labeling. So we ask consumers to come to the lab, we ask them to make choices for food without environmental labeling or with environmental labeling for an everyday scenario or for an environmentally friendly meal. What we found in this experiment was that environmental labeling indeed helped to decrease the environmental footprint of the products that consumers choose. And so there was an effect on the label. So it's useful to provide consumers with information. And in the environmentally friendly scenario, the label brought new information about the environmental impact of food products. So that was useful to consumers. And in fact, that was useful for them to get away from meat-based products and consume more plant-based meals. So interesting to shift in the expected direction. And we did another experiment that was quite different to modify the choice architecture around products. So go one step further, change the default. So that was an experiment carried out in a university restaurant over 1 month. And we asked the chef to modify the food offer by offering meals based on the regular choice, 25 or 24% of vegetarian offer in these meals, or we ask them to double the share of vegetarian meals, so going from 24 to 48. What happened when we look at the choices of the consumer? It doubled, as simple as it is. And they always had the choice at any moment during the experience to choose meat or plant-based food. But just by modifying the choice architecture, we doubled the share. Very interesting. So in this case, we said nothing to the consumers. We didn't say we modified the offer, we didn't advertise, we didn't use environmental label, we just changed the choice architecture. Only 6% of students noticed a change in the vegetarian meal served, so very small share, and they were still very happy with the offer they had. So we checked that they liked the product that were offered to them. So when we want to address consumer issues, we should think about how to change the environment in which food choices are made, and not only change the products, but we should think about a combined approaches to have as many levels as possible to act. So in conclusion, maybe a couple of take-home messages. I think increasing the share of nutrient-dense plants in the diet still is a remaining challenge, and a huge challenge, because we are really far from the target and it should move much faster than this. Sweet and energy-dense starchy plants are easier to accept than vegetable, legumes, or fruits. Ensuring their micronutrient density is very essential. Reinforcing also micronutrient density in all plant-based food is a key aspect, I guess, beyond agronomic considerations that are generally driving breeding efforts, especially for nutrients which may be lacking in plant-based diets. So vitamin B, D, iron, zinc, omega-3. So I was very happy to listen from the example of Jean-Denis about the camelina oil. Was a bit disappointed to see that, in fact, the nutritional objective was contradicting the agronomic perspective, but I hope there is still room for this route. Omega-3 is very important for brain development and for making people smarter. And I think we really need that currently. So I hope you succeed sometime more than me. We need to also probably think further. The nutritional benefits and taste trade-offs of compounds such as polyphenol, which can be very useful for and continue to establish the science behind this. And the general reinforcement in micronutrient density, I think remains a key issue and should be considered in the perspective of food system optimization. So we certainly eat too much, but if we eat less, we still need to cover our micronutrient needs. Reinforcing or ensuring that when we debuterize food, for instance, we don't lose essential micronutrients is something that should still be in the focus. Understanding the role of climate change on micronutrient density also I think is useful. I guess you all work on this, but for breeding, considering plant acceptability and nutritional value up to the consumer plate is central. Maybe 20 years ago, I was in a meeting with breeders and they all talk about the consumers, but I had the impression they were not talking about the same person as I did. In fact, they were talking about distributors. So for plant growers, consumers are distributors, but it's not exactly the same. So we should really think all the way to the consumer plate. And the barriers to implementation of plant-based food in food systems should not be underestimated. And also systemic levels should be considered for really a more comprehensive approach and trying to really break the barriers. So not to mention how to break culture, as Olivier touched upon. So really interestingly opening this path, but changing social norms is very difficult. That's why I really was interested in your example, talking about agroecology and the periphery of things. Is the purpose of agroecology to become central in food system? I wonder, maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure if it's really good for at-scale solutions. Maybe it's just good for showing another path, but not possible to reach out. We know from a variety of perspectives also that it's going to be a bit difficult to feed the whole world with agroecology. So maybe combination, again, diversity of solutions to make it more robust can be interesting. And thank you for your attention.